Alien girl trapped in a cage, treated like cargo, until one man defied the odds. Men are haunted by the vastness of eternity, and so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the stars? Ancient proverb of the inner colonies. Jaxon Raines had seen it all. He thought so, at least. To roam the interstellar shipping lanes for years was to witness both the wonders and the banalities that the infinite cosmos offered. He had ferried contraband weaponry across the dusty edges of the Orion Spur, slipped exotic animals through quarantines on industrial worlds, and traded in relics of broken civilizations long lost to stellar cataclysms. There were some lines he never crossed. He drew them for his own survival, for what thin veneer of a conscience he retained. But he had never been overly sentimental. Survival in his world demanded compromise, and he had learned that lesson well. Still, he had not been prepared for what he found in the murky cargo hold that day, or for the swirling turmoil it would awaken in him. The cargo hold belonged to the Blue Serpent, a freighter that Jaxon had been sent to inspect under the orders of his employer, Varen Holt. Holt was the kind of man who hoarded secrets and skeletons in locked compartments. Most of these compartments were kept figuratively closed, ensuring that the myriad illicit deals he orchestrated remained hidden from prying eyes. Yet, Holt had a special interest in the Blue Serpent, a vessel allegedly carrying something more valuable than any artifact or contraband creatures. Jaxon, favored for his cool composure, was tasked with retrieving it. No questions asked. But when the Blue Serpent's crew fled at the very hint of trouble, Jaxon boarded easily, stepping through corridors littered with half-eaten ration packs, flickering lights, and the tang of burnt ozone. The crew's abrupt escape boded ill. He had no illusions that they had left behind a trove of treasure. Smugglers often ran at the first sign of an authority raid, or in this case, the approach of Varen Holt's men. They left the cargo behind, but only the cargo they could not move quickly. Jaxon navigated one rusted corridor after another, rummaging through half-empty crates of ion harvesters and outdated fusion cells. Nothing unusual, mostly scrap. Then, at the far end of the cargo bay, behind stacked metal crates and coiled docking clamps, he discovered a partition sealed behind a partially jammed blast door. A ruddy, flickering light spilled from the cracks. He forced the door open with a hydraulic crowbar he'd scavenged. The hinges groaned in protest, but finally surrendered, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, under a single overhead lamp, a cage rested. And inside that cage was a woman. Her skin shone emerald green even under the hazy red emergency light. She wore ragged, threadbare clothes that might once have been a pale, silvery gown. She crouched with her knees drawn up, hugging them with thin, trembling arms, her hair an inky black that spilled over her shoulders like a midnight waterfall. Her face was turned away, but Jaxon could see bruises marring her arms. Small, purplish patches that told a story of cruel handling. She was chained to the bars. One of her golden eyes flicked up at him, and something within Jaxon lurched, like a cosmic shift, a sudden quake of conscience. The men who had given him this assignment had described it as a high-value, biological cargo. They had never mentioned she was a living, intelligent being. Cargo, they had said, as though it were a trivial detail. Slowly, Jaxon approached. He had spent years coasting on the edge of legality and morality, but he had never before found a person treated as an object to be bought and sold. He had known the rumor mills talk of alien trafficking, but had never dwelled on it. Now, faced with a trembling, green-skinned woman who gazed at him through tangled hair and battered pride, Jaxon realized he was at a crossroads. When he reached the cage, he saw the sorrow in her eyes. More than sorrow, resignation. As though she had encountered too many men with unscrupulous intentions to hope otherwise this time. Gently, he placed his gloved hand on the rusted bars. A briny smell, faint but sharp, clung to the air around her, reminiscent of exotic sea creatures from watery worlds. "Can you speak?" Jaxon asked, his voice quiet. He felt odd, as though any loudness might shatter the tense hush. She did not answer, but in those golden irises, he saw recognition. She understood him, or at least recognized the tone of his voice. Her gaze shifted to the cuff around her leg, then back to him, and then she lowered her head. The slight tremble of her shoulders was heartbreaking. Jaxon swallowed hard. He had a job. He had instructions. He was supposed to secure the cargo, deliver it to Varen Holt, and collect his pay. That was the nature of such deals. No complications, no hesitation. But this, how could he simply walk away from such a sight? He checked the lock on the cage. It was a standard mechanical lock with a numeric keypad, though the screen flickered as though it had been damaged. He rifled through a satchel at his belt and pulled out a portable codebreaker device. The display flickered in the gloom, casting an eerie greenish glow on his face. As he activated it, he turned to the caged woman. "I'm Jaxon," he said, not expecting a reply. I'll get you out of here." Her eyes flew wide, luminous in the dim space. Astonishment mingled with confusion. There was no gratitude in her face. Perhaps she did not dare to hope. But Jaxon read the faint glimmer, a question, a spark that hinted at fragile trust. He managed to crack the lock with the device in moments, and the door hissed open. She remained still, possibly fearing a trick. Only when he carefully moved his hands to the manacles around her ankles did she tense, but then permitted him to free her. Once the cuffs clicked off, her legs slid forward, awkward from prolonged confinement. Jaxon saw her wincing as pins and needles pricked her muscles. He wanted to speak again, but found no words that seemed adequate for this abrupt rescue. In all honesty, he was not certain what he was doing, only that he could not consign her to the fate Holt had in store. They had called her cargo, but she was a sentient being, clearly intelligent and clearly terrified. He reached for a small canister of medical spray from his belt. Her eyes narrowed at the hiss of the nozzle, but he quietly explained, "For bruises," pressing the salve to her arms. The swelling and discoloration eased a bit beneath the anti-inflammatory mist. She shook her head as though to clear a fog. Then she whispered, her voice cracked and raw, but still carrying a fragile elegance. "Thank you." Her accent was lilting, each syllable feather-light. Jackson's heart thudded in his chest. He had not even been sure she spoke human standard. "You're welcome," he replied. A sudden tremor rattled the ship, and red lights flared. An automated voice echoed through the corridor. "Warning. Reactor meltdown in progress. All personnel evacuate immediately." The Blue Serpent, long in disrepair, seemed on the brink of self-destruction. With no time to linger, Jaxon gently wrapped an arm around the woman, helping her stand. Though she was tall, nearly as tall as he was, she leaned heavily on him, each step unsteady from her battered condition. They hurried through the labyrinth of corridors, climbing up a trembling ladder. Sparks showered around them from exposed wiring. At the final hatch leading back to his own ship, the distant wind, Jaxon nearly stumbled under a barrage of debris that fell from a collapsing beam. The heat was becoming unbearable as the Blue Serpent's compromised reactor flared. With a final leap, they tumbled through the connecting airlock. Jaxon slammed the hatch, severing the docking clamp with an emergency release. The distant wind's thrusters roared to life as it pulled free from the doomed freighter. From the cockpit window, he watched the Blue Serpent drift, glimmers of energy sparking from within, until a silent explosion blossomed in space, scattering twisted shards of hull. Jaxon caught himself with both hands on the pilot console, panting. Beside him, the emerald-skinned woman leaned against the co-pilot's seat. She was still trembling, but the open terror in her eyes had receded, replaced by weary relief. She was free, but free to what fate? They set a course for a safe harbor on the outskirts of the Zathran Belt. As the distant wind slipped into faster-than-light travel, Jaxon led her to the medical bay, a cramped compartment lined with humming diagnostic machines. He retrieved water, offering it to her. She gulped it, then coughed, tears welling in her eyes as she realized how parched she had been. "I'm sorry," Jaxon said, awkward. "Take it slow." She nodded, taking smaller sips. When she finished, she stared at him for several heartbeats, as though cataloging every detail of his face. The scar near his left eye from a bar brawl in Tamboro Station, the stubble on his chin, his close-cropped brown hair turning dusty at the temples. He cleared his throat. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" She lifted her wrists. Those slight, ugly marks where the shackles had chafed her skin were evident. Jaxon gently applied more of the medical salve. She exhaled shakily. Then, in that gentle voice still hoarse from disuse, she said, "Kaela. My name is Kaela." A swirl of relief and something like compassion shot through him. "Kaela," he repeated. "That's beautiful." The hush that followed felt charged, as though her name alone began bridging the gap of trust. For a while, they spoke in halting conversation. He discovered she was from a planet called Serev, located beyond the known hyperlanes of his charts, an isolated world seldom visited by humans. She, along with others of her kind, had been enslaved by unscrupulous traders after her village was destroyed in an off-world raid. Kaela had never known her captors' true motives. They only whispered about her kind possessing rare healing blood, a valuable commodity for unspeakable black market experiments. At the mention of healing blood, Jaxon's stomach twisted. No wonder Holt wanted her so badly. If Kaela's blood was rumored to have regenerative properties that alone could fetch a fortune or be used to create a twisted advantage in warfare or commerce, he realized with a sinking dread that by freeing her, he had placed himself in direct opposition to Varen Holt, one of the wealthiest and most ruthless men in the quadrant. "Look," he said softly, "I'm sorry you had to go through this. I promise I won't let them take you again." The words came more earnestly than he expected. In her eyes, he saw a flicker of hope. But Jaxon knew hope was precarious at best. Even now, Holt would be waiting for news. Once he learned that Jaxon had not delivered the cargo, and that the blue serpent had exploded, he would suspect betrayal. Holt was not the forgiving type. Jaxon had flown for him for years, sure, but the man's loyalty ended where profit began. And Kaela's blood was, by rumor, an immense profit. Still, Jaxon had never been the type to abandon ship mid-storm. Kaela was a living, breathing person, not some crate to be handed over like a commodity. He had made his choice the moment he opened that cage. The distant wind settled into orbit around a small planetoid on the fringes of the Zathran belt, a speck of rocks swirling with pale dust storms. Jaxon had an old contact here named Morva, a retired smuggler who now tinkered with starship repairs for a modest living. If anyone could give them temporary shelter and cloak their ship's signature, it would be Morva. They set down on a landing pad that was little more than a barren crater turned docking bay. A single habdome rose on the horizon, connected by pressurized corridors to a series of squat-out buildings. As they disembarked, Kaela clung to Jaxon's arm. The gravity was lighter than standard, making her steps uncertain. Inside the dome, they were greeted by stale recycled air. Morva, short and solidly built, wore a grease-stained jumpsuit. Her left eye was augmented with a lens that glowed a faint orange. She greeted Jaxon with a lopsided grin that quickly faded when she noticed Kaela's bruises and emerald skin. "Old friend," Morva said in a low voice. "What kind of mess have you gotten yourself into this time?" Jaxon exhaled. "Bigger than usual." He hesitated, then jerked his head at Kaela. "She's the reason." Morva's gaze flicked between them. "Let's go to my workshop. I have privacy jammers. You never know who might be listening." She led them down a corridor lined with welding rigs and hoverbike parts. Eventually, they reached a small office, the walls hung with star charts and a scattering of mechanical components. Morva shut the door, flicked a switch that bathed the room in a dull hum, then motioned for them to sit. "Start talking," she said, arms folded. With Kaela perched on the edge of a seat, Jaxon recounted the events on the Blue Serpent, her imprisonment, the meltdown, and their narrow escape. He did not hold back the fact that the prime orchestrator behind her capture was Varen Holt, nor that Kaela's healing blood was the commodity Holt desired. Morva whistled softly. "Holt's not just a petty thug. He has deep pockets, plenty of people in them. If you crossed him, you might as well put a bounty on your own head." "I figured as much," Jaxon said, running a hand through his hair. Kaela, silent until then, spoke softly. "I am sorry. This trouble you face is because you rescued me." Her accent shimmered with sincerity, and Morva's expression softened. "It's not your fault, child." Jaxon knew what he was doing. "Didn't you?" He glanced away. "I couldn't just leave her there." Morva nodded. "Well, you did the right thing, even if it's the suicidal thing. Now, if Holt is half as ruthless as rumor says, you'll need more than a hiding place. You'll need a plan." She tapped the lens in her left eye, scrolling through local feeds. "Let's see. The Zathran Belt is a big place, but it won't hide you forever. Holt has trackers who can sniff out a ghost. We could change your ship's transponder signature, maybe rework some hull plating, but that's only a temporary fix." Jaxon's gut churned. He glanced at Kaela. She studied them both, silent, watchful. Her golden eyes brimmed with an intelligent calm. We need more than a fix, Jaxon said. We need to end this. For good. Morva raised an eyebrow. End it? As in cut a deal? Or face Holt directly? Jaxon snorted. You think Holt would negotiate? He'd take Kaela the moment we stepped into his domain and put a bullet in my skull as an afterthought. Morva leaned back. Then you're talking about confrontation. That's no small feat. Holt's fortress is on Daraxis Prime. Rumor is he's got private security armed to the teeth, plus a starship fleet. It's not a place you just waltz in. We can't run forever, Kaela said softly. Her gaze flicked to Jaxon, her voice resolute despite her injuries. They will keep hunting me, and they will keep enslaving my people. Holt is but one link in a chain. Jackson's pulse hammered. This was bigger than just saving one life. If Kaela's entire species was at risk of being captured and harvested, then stamping out Holt might at least slow the trade. He glanced to Morva. If we do this, we'll need help. Allies with a grudge against Holt, maybe. Tech, weapons, anything we can get. Morva sighed. I know a few folks, but bringing them in means a bigger footprint. Holt will notice. She paused. Though, come to think of it, there's a rumor that a competitor of Holt's, a woman named Soraya Draven, has been itching to topple him for years. She runs her own smuggling ring out of Kestrid Station. If you can convince her that hurting Holt is in her best interest, you might get her on your side. If you don't mind dancing with the devil. Devil or not, Jaxon said grimly. We need more than just this battered old ship and a dream if we're going to stand a chance. Kaela inhaled a slow breath. I do not wish to kill, but I cannot let them continue to take my people. Morva studied Kaela for a moment. People like you, with that healing blood, must be very rare indeed. Holt probably has labs set up for experiments. He's likely shipping your people across the galaxy to the highest bidder. By the stars, Jaxon, you sure you're in for this? He met Kaela's eyes. For the first time, he saw not just fear or vulnerability there, but fierce determination. Jaxon realized she was stronger than she appeared. I'm in, he said quietly. Morva nodded. Then I'll cloak your ship and start making calls. If you want to talk to Soraya Draven, you'll have to do it in person. She'll want to see that you're serious. Kestrid Station is a rough place, so watch your step. Jaxon stood, offering his hand to Kaela. She rose, her slender fingers curling into his for a fleeting moment. Thank you, she whispered to Morva. You risk much to help us. Morva simply shrugged. A friend in need, she said, her voice gruff with an emotion she quickly concealed. Go. Rest. I have work to do. They found a cramped bunk room attached to Morva's workshop, a place that smelled of old lubricants and scorched metal. Kaela, unused to the concept of artificial habitats, traced her fingers along the curved walls. Jaxon wanted to give her space, but he also felt a curious need to talk with her, to understand her experiences. When she settled on the edge of a bunk, he ventured closer. How long were you in captivity? He asked gently. She closed her eyes, as though counting the days in her head. I am not certain. Time was distorted. My village was destroyed at dawn. Our suns had just risen. Then, I remember the cold darkness of a holding cell. They took me from planet to planet. I was sold twice, maybe 3 times. To them, we were cargo. Her voice trembled. It might have been a year, or more. Something like rage flickered beneath Jaxon's skin. I'm sorry, he said again, though it felt woefully inadequate. The entire galaxy's cruelty could not be undone with an apology. She lifted her gaze. Your world, it has many who do evil things. But it has you too. Not all is lost. A part of him wanted to disclaim that he was no hero, that he had done plenty of questionable jobs in his life. Yet, he did not want to stain the fragile hope she seemed to cling to. Instead, he settled on. I'm just a man who couldn't look away. She extended her hand, the emerald hue catching the dim overhead light. On her palm were faint scars. They tested me often. They took vials of blood, and they seemed disappointed that I couldn't just heal them instantly. My abilities aren't magic. We can heal faster than most species, but it's not an infinite well. We can be exhausted. We can die. The admission made Jaxon's chest tighten. Then they wanted something that isn't even real. They believed the legends. My people have always had a capacity to speed healing, and some can sense the pathways of life. But we are mortal. Our blood can't cure every ill. Jaxon bit his lip. You're still in danger, even if you don't have the power they want. They might not believe you. She nodded. I know. Silence stretched between them. There, In that dingy bunk room on a distant planetoid, they were two souls caught in the cosmic undertow, forging a bond that neither fully understood but both needed. The next few days passed in a blur. Morva painstakingly erased the distant wind's transponder ID from galactic registries, forging a new code that would help them slip through Holt's net undetected, at least for a short while. She also rigged the hull with radar-absorbent plating to reduce their detectability. In between these tasks, Morva put Jaxon in touch with the shadowy contact who claimed to speak for Soraya Draven. A meeting was arranged at Kestrad Station, that lawless haven of smugglers, bounty hunters, and mercenaries. As Jaxon prepared the ship for departure, Kaela hovered by the cargo bay doors, a quiet intensity in her gaze. He approached her gently. "You don't have to come. Kestrad can be dangerous." She tilted her head. "I stayed silent for too long. Now that we move, I do not want to hide." He studied her face, found determination etched there. He nodded. "All right, but stick close. People might notice you, especially your skin. We can find a cloak or hood to help you blend in." She touched her emerald cheek. "I understand, but I will not hide if it comes to confrontation." He exhaled, half admiring, half fearing her resolve. "Then let's get ready. We leave in an hour." Morva appeared from behind a crate, carrying a small duffel. "Here," she said, pressing it into Kaela's hands. "It's not fancy, but it'll cover your features enough to avoid immediate curiosity. Kestrad is used to seeing different species, but better to keep a low profile." Then she turned to Jaxon. "And you, try not to get yourselves killed. Holt's got bounty posts popping up on the networks. Someone matching your description attacked a freighter and stole valuable property. He's spinning it as space piracy." Jaxon snorted in disgust. "Figures. All right, we'll be careful." Morva clasped his forearm in a rough gesture of friendship. "You helped me out of a jam more than once. I'm just paying you back. Good luck, friend." With that, the distant wind sealed its cargo ramp and lifted off. The planetoid shrank behind them as they soared away, entering the swirling expanse of the Zathran belt. Tumbling asteroids cast fleeting shadows against starlight. Kaela watched from the cockpit window, mesmerized by the cosmic ballet of stone and ice. Soon, they engaged the warp drive, the stars stretching into luminous lines around them. Jaxon felt the familiar lurch in his gut as space-time bent. This time, though, the usual adrenaline rush was tinged with dread. They were heading into the lion's den to beg an alliance with a cunning smuggler queen, all while a furious Varen Holt scoured the galaxy for them. He couldn't help a wry grin. "I've been in tight spots before, but never quite like this." Kaela turned, curiosity lighting her eyes. "And how did you escape those times?" He shrugged. "Usually by improvising and flying by the seat of my pants." A soft giggle escaped her. "I hope your improvisations serve us well." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth tipping up. "Me too, Kaela. Me too." Kestrad Station was a far cry from civilized starports. It hung suspended near the swirling gases of the Nebulan Rift, a spider-like structure of docking pylons and habitats strung together across miles of vacuum. Neon lights flashed advertisements along its hull, blatant enticements for stimulants, gambling dens, and black market goods. The constant chatter of thousands of comm channels filled the airwaves. They docked in a hidden bay recommended by Soraya Draven's contact. Unlike most busy terminals, this bay was deserted except for a pair of battered cargo lifters and a single walkway leading into a private corridor. Jaxon and Kaela disembarked cautiously, scanning for signs of an ambush. A short, wiry man with a shock of violet hair emerged from the shadows. He wore patched leather armor, and a single silver earring glinted in the station's harsh overhead lights. "You the ones wanting to see Draven?" he asked in a gravelly voice. Jaxon nodded. "We have business with her." The man snorted. "Everyone says that. But you've got a direct line from Morva, so you're in luck. Follow me. Don't stray, or you'll end up in places you don't want to be." They trailed him through winding corridors, passing feral-looking thugs and suspicious glances from side hallways. Kaela kept her hood up, though her emerald arms occasionally flashed in the flickering lights. Jaxon felt the weight of those stares. At last, they reached a reinforced door flanked by two armed guards. The wiry man rapped on the panel, and the door slid open with a metallic hiss. Inside, smoke curled in the air, tinted by neon strips that gave the space a surreal luminescence. The chamber looked like a private lounge, plush seating arranged in a semicircle around a central dais. Reclining there, on a cushioned seat, was a woman with silver-white hair and skin the color of pale sand. Her eyes were a sharp, predatory green. Soraya Draven. So, she drawled, eyes flicking to Jaxon. You're the hero who thinks to cross Varen Holt? He resisted the urge to correct her, labeling him a hero. We need your help, he said simply. She tilted her head, a cascade of silver hair draping over one shoulder. That's a bold request. Holt is formidable, and he's not one to let a betrayal slide. Why should I risk my organization for you? Jaxon gestured to Kaela, who lowered her hood, revealing her bruised yet striking features. Soraya's eyes narrowed with interest. This is Kaela. She's from a people Holt's been enslaving. They call them living pharmaceuticals. That's monstrous, even by the underworld standards. Soraya drummed her fingers on the armrest. Morality doesn't always drive business decisions. Kaela stepped forward, voice quiet but firm. My people have done nothing to harm your domain. We only wish to be left in peace. Holt's greed endangers us all, perhaps more than you know. Soraya studied Kaela, then waved a hand at the swirling smoke overhead. Holt is a competitor. He's too big for my liking. More monopoly means less profit for the rest of us. But going to war with him outright would cost me dearly. She steepled her fingers. What do you propose? Jaxon spoke up. We have an idea where Holt's labs are, and possibly where more of Kaela's people might be imprisoned. If we can strike his operation from within and free them, we undermine him. But we need resources, ships, fighters, infiltration tech. You have that. So you want me to fund your crusade? A humorless smile. And what do I get out of it? Besides the satisfaction of seeing Holt brought down a peg, you'll gain territory, or at least reduce your biggest rival's hold on the black market. Once news spreads that Holt's trafficking ring has been dismantled, his remaining partners will scramble for cover. You can fill the vacuum. Soraya's calculating stare lingered on Jaxon, then on Kaela. A vacuum can be profitable indeed. She stood, gliding closer, her presence commanding. But I sense there's something more here. The rumors say these emerald skins have miraculous properties. Is that part of your angle? A muscle tightened in Jackson's jaw. Kaela's not a tool. We're not offering you her blood. Kaela shook her head, stepping forward. My blood does not confer immortality or superpowers. It might speed healing, but it's not what Holt believes it to be. I would never trade it as a commodity, anyway. My life is my own. Soraya smirked. All right. Spare me the moral outrage. I'm a businesswoman, not a saint. She paced in a slow circle. Still, crippling Holt is worth a great deal to me. Even if your motives are altruistic, I can benefit. Fine. I'll provide you with a small strike team, enough to infiltrate Holt's main compound on Duraxis Prime. Beyond that, you're on your own. I'm not launching an all-out war. If you fail, I'll wash my hands of it. Jaxon let out a slow breath. That's more than we hoped for. Soraya fixed him with a pointed look. Don't thank me just yet. I want something in return, call it a safeguard. Holt has data on his high-paying clients, other big players in the sector. I want that list. It'll help me consolidate my power once he's down. Jaxon nodded. Deal. If we can access that data, we'll deliver it. Then we have an accord. Meet my lieutenant, Andera. Soraya beckoned to a woman who stepped from the shadows. Andera was tall, with closely cropped hair and an air of lethal competence. Andera will go with you to Duraxis. She'll coordinate the infiltration. You do as she says on the ground, or this alliance is void. Jaxon swallowed, nodding. The force of Andera's glare made it clear who'd be in charge. Good, Soraya purred. Now go, make your preparations. We strike in 48 standard hours. And remember, if you betray me or fail me, I won't hesitate to cut my losses. Kaela lowered her hood again as they exited, her face pale. I do not trust her. Jaxon gave a mirthless chuckle. Me neither. But sometimes you've got to ally with the devil to fight the bigger evil. Back aboard the Distant Wind, Jaxon wasted no time in briefing Kaela on the infiltration plan as they awaited Andera and her small team. Duraxis Prime is Holt's stronghold, he explained. It's a heavily industrialized planet, riddled with factories and private security checkpoints. Holt's main compound sits in the capital city. Supposedly, it's got underground labs, detention blocks, the works. Kaela nodded, her eyes troubled. My people might be inside. Likely so. We want to free them, gather evidence, and get that client list. Then, hopefully, blow the place to kingdom come. She took a breath. How many of us will there be? Andera is bringing maybe 6 or 7 of her best. She claims that stealth is better than a large force. We'll slip in, sabotage from the inside, and slip out if we can. Kaela wrapped her arms around herself. I wish I could help more directly, but I've never been trained to fight. Jaxon thought of her healing abilities. Your presence is enough to help them see they're not alone. Once inside, if we encounter your people, you can help them keep calm and maybe lead them out. She offered a tentative smile. I will do my best. Before long, Andera arrived with her team, lean men and women dressed in dark tactical gear. They carried sleek rifles and stunner pistols, plus a variety of infiltration gadgets. No chatter about who they were or where they came from. Soraya Draven's crew, no doubt well-versed in covert ops. Andera wasted no time. We'll jump to Daraxis in separate ships and synchronize arrival. Then we break atmosphere at these coordinates. She held up a hollow map, landing in the city outskirts. We have a contact who can hide our ships in an old warehouse. From there, we'll proceed on foot or by local transport to the compound. We hit them fast, grab the data, free the prisoners if feasible, then exfil. Clear. Jaxon nodded. We're clear. Andera's steely gaze locked on Kaela for a moment. She seemed about to ask a question, but thought better of it. Instead, she turned back to Jaxon. Just keep her out of sight until the right moment. A green-skinned woman will draw attention. Kaela stayed silent, though Jaxon caught the flicker of indignation in her eyes. He squeezed her arm gently, a silent reassurance. Thus, the plan was set in motion. The distant wind parted ways from Soraya's cruiser, jumping into FTL. The next hours were a tense countdown, each passing second bringing them closer to a confrontation that could cost them everything. Daraxis Prime emerged from the swirling darkness of hyperspace, a planet of ashen skies and sprawling urban centers. Thick clouds of pollution hovered, tinted orange by the glow of thousands of factory furnaces. As they descended, the cityscape unfurled. High-rises of steel and glass, elevated highways, landing platforms ringed with security drones. Far below, the population bustled in the haze, hurrying between towering industrial blocks. They touched down at a decrepit warehouse on the city's outskirts, where Andera's ship was already parked. Inside, they found the contact, a reedy, nervous man named Calvis. He wrung his hands, stammering that the local authorities turned a blind eye to Holt's operations, so caution was critical. No official help would be coming. After covering the distant wind with a camouflage net that scrambled sensor readings, Jaxon and Kaela joined Andera's team. They donned hooded cloaks that concealed their faces and weaponry, then climbed into an old cargo hauler that Calvis provided. A battered vehicle with rusted panels, it blended nicely with Daraxis Prime's dingy environment. Their route took them through congested streets patrolled by Holt's private security, men in black uniforms carrying plasma rifles. Banners displayed Holt's corporate insignia, as though brazenly proclaiming his rule. Tension tightened in Jaxon's gut. This city was effectively Holt's domain. At any moment, they could be recognized, and the alarm sounded. After half an hour of weaving through traffic, they stopped in a shadowed alley not far from the compound's perimeter. A towering fence of electrified mesh and guard towers surrounded a cluster of ominous-looking buildings. Overhead, the sky was choked with smog and the drone of patrolling ships. Andera's plan was simple but dangerous. The infiltration team would breach a service entrance near a loading bay. Once inside, they'd split, one group heading for the underground labs and prisoner cells, the other heading for the data archives. They had minimal intel on the internal layout, so improvisation would be key. While Andera's second-in-command rigged a portable EMP to knock out surveillance, Jaxon tensed. Ready? He asked Kaela. She nodded, face drawn but resolute. Together, they slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence that Andera's people had cut. The hum of electricity buzzed overhead, but the fence's alarm line had been expertly bypassed by a small device that glowed green on the chain links. They pressed on through the shadow of looming warehouses, each building more foreboding than the last. At a nondescript side door, Andera's tech-savvy teammate used a code scrambler to pop the lock. The door slid open with a squeak. They stepped into a dim corridor, the air tinged with antiseptic smells that reminded Jaxon of med bays and scientific labs. Overhead lights flickered, revealing a polished floor and signage in an alien language. The hush was unsettling. They advanced in pairs, Andera leading the first group deeper into the complex. Jaxon, Kaela, and two of Andera's fighters took a left turn toward where they hoped the detention cells lay. It felt eerily quiet, but Jaxon sensed the presence of watchers, either via cameras or hidden guards. Down another hallway, they discovered labs behind transparent walls. Strapped to tables were creatures of various species, all unconscious or sedated. Some had monitors attached, tubes snaking from their veins to tall machines. Kaela gasped softly. Jaxon clenched his fists. This place was a nightmare. They hurried on, mindful that their time was limited. Before long, they reached a locked metal door with a glowing keypad. Through a small window, Jaxon glimpsed rows of cells. He nodded at Kaela, who was trembling. "We've found them." As Andera's fighters kept watch, Jaxon used a hacking device to override the lock. The door slid open to reveal a block of cramped cells, each partition sealed by energy bars. Inside them, dozens of prisoners of different species cowered. Among them were at least 5 with the same emerald skin as Kaela, their golden eyes dulled by sedation or despair. Kaela rushed forward, pressing herself to the bars of the nearest cell. A young woman within stirred, blinking in confusion. Then, recognition and raw emotion spilled across her face. "Kaela," she whispered, voice wavering. Tears filled Kayla's eyes. "It's me," she breathed, fumbling for the control panel. "We're here to get you out." Another prisoner in the adjacent cell weakly called, "Please, help us." Jaxon moved with frantic purpose, hacking each cell's energy lock. Gradually, the barriers fizzled and dropped. Kaela went from person to person, offering soothing words, supporting them as they staggered out. Some were too weak to walk unaided. A few from other species gazed at the rescuers in astonishment, hardly believing liberation was possible. In the corridor behind them, one of Andera's fighters hissed, "We've tripped an alarm. Security teams inbound." Jaxon cursed under his breath. "We need to move, now." He gently lifted an elderly Serev man whose emerald skin had faded with age. Kaela supported a limping woman. They herded the prisoners out of the cell block, back the way they came, only to meet a squad of black uniformed guards rushing down the corridor with rifles raised. "Cover them," Jaxon yelled, dropping to one knee as the guards opened fire. Energy bolts sizzled overhead. One of Andera's fighters returned fire, dropping 2 guards. The corridor erupted in bright plasma flashes. Kaela flinched, shielding the elderly man from stray shots. Jaxon gritted his teeth, rolling to a side panel where he located a control console. With a hurried override command, he slammed shut a blast door between them and the bulk of the pursuing guards. That would buy a few precious seconds. They hastened down a side corridor, pushing the freed prisoners along. The place was a maze, and tension mounted with every step. Lab alarms blared overhead, red lights strobing. Doors hissed open and shut in the distance, and booted footsteps echoed. Eventually, they reached a connecting hallway that angled toward the exit. For a moment, Jaxon dared hope. That hope was dashed when a tall, broad figure emerged from around the corner, flanked by more guards. Varen Holt himself, his face twisted in a snarl as he took in the ragged group of freed prisoners. Well, Holt said, voice dripping with venom. "I expected you might come for her eventually, Jaxon. Didn't think you'd be fool enough to try a direct assault. But I see you've expanded your ambitions. Are you playing hero now?" Holt lifted a pistol, leveling it at Jackson's chest. His guards aimed rifles at the group of prisoners, forcing them to halt. Jaxon felt Kaela trembling behind him. He raised his own gun, but Holt's men far outnumbered them, and any shot could mean a massacre. "You could have had a nice payday," Holt continued, eyes gleaming with fury. "Instead, you throw it all away for what? Some alien sob story." Kaela, summoning courage, stepped forward. "We are not property. You have no right." Holt cut her off with a sneer. "You're nothing but resources. Exotic commodities to be harvested. That's the way of the galaxy, girl, and you're naive if you think otherwise." He shook his head, turning the pistol on her. "I only need you alive enough to bleed. Maybe I'll do this the hard way. Kill your would-be saviors in front of you." Jaxon's blood pounded. If they tried to fight, Kaela and the others would be cut down instantly. He flicked his gaze around for an escape route, but found none. This was it, pinned in a corridor with a ruthless warlord holding all the cards. Then, from behind Holt's squad, a flash of movement, and Dara's strike team. They must have looped around after grabbing the data. They opened fire in a precise volley. Holt's guards jerked as energy bolts tore through them. Holt himself dove aside, returning fire. The corridor erupted in chaos, stray bolts sparking off metal walls. Jaxon seized the moment, shouting, "Go!" to the freed prisoners. Bullets hammered the floor near them as Jaxon and Kaela rushed forward, shepherding the group. Holt snarled, standing in their path, but Andera tackled him from behind, grappling for control of his pistol. They slammed into the wall, exchanging furious blows. "Jaxon, get them out!" Andera roared. He nodded, pushing onward. The corridor opened into a loading bay with large steel doors. Two more of Andera's fighters were already there, gunning down the last of the guards stationed by the exit. Alarms shrieked, lights flashing in angry red pulses. With a final override, Jaxon unlocked the main doors. They rumbled open, revealing a moonlit yard dotted with shipping crates. A half-dozen security turrets swiveled toward them. Kaela cried out in warning, but Andera's fighters lobbed a pair of EMP grenades that crackled in midair, disabling the turrets with sputtering sparks. Behind them, Holt's furious shout resounded. Jaxon glanced back, saw Holt break free from Andera's hold, and aim his pistol. Time slowed. Holt fired. Andera collapsed to the ground in a lifeless heap, a crimson stain spreading across her torso. Kaela gasped, tears springing to her eyes. Jaxon felt an ice-cold fury. Before Holt could fire again, Jaxon leveled his own pistol, a single pull of the trigger sending a laser bolt into Holt's chest. Holt staggered back, shock contorting his features. He clutched the wound, blood seeping through his fine jacket. "You!" Holt hissed, eyes blazing with hatred. He raised his pistol once more, but his strength was failing. He stumbled. Jaxon fired again, striking him in the shoulder. Holt crumpled. Silence descended, broken only by the wail of alarms. For a split second, Jaxon met Holt's gaze, saw the flicker of mortal realization. Then the warlord slumped, breathing labored. Jaxon exhaled, turning away to help the others. But Kaela hesitated, stepping toward Holt. She knelt by him, her face anguished. He glared at her, rasping, "What are you doing?" Her eyes welled with tears. "I do not wish to see you suffer, even after all you have done." She took a shaky breath, then placed her hand over his chest. A gentle green glow suffused her palm. Holt gasped as some of his pain eased. The bullet wound, while not healed, was no longer gushing. Her healing gift slowed his bleeding, stabilized him enough that he would not die immediately. Jaxon and the others stared, unsure whether to protest. Was she saving the life of a monster? But Kaela rose, voice trembling with exhaustion. "No more killing," she said. "Not if we can help it." Holt stared up at her, confusion warring with anger on his features. But he was too weak to speak further. Jaxon gently took Kaela's arm. "Come on," he murmured. "We need to go." They left Holt behind, alive but defeated, his empire in ruins around him. Outside, dawn was breaking over the soot-stained skyline of Daraxis Prime. Though black plumes of factory smoke still scarred the sky, there was a sense of possibility in the air. Sirens wailed as the city's corrupt police, now uncertain of Holt's continuing dominion, scrambled to contain the chaos. Meanwhile, Andera's surviving fighters, carrying their fallen comrade's body, joined Jaxon, Kaela, and the freed prisoners in commandeering cargo trucks. They raced through the streets, ignoring half-hearted attempts to stop them. Word spread like wildfire that Holt's fortress had been breached, his private army defeated. Civilians and workers peered from windows, some cheering, others fearful, as the improbable caravan rumbled by. At the warehouse where their ships were hidden, they loaded the exhausted prisoners aboard. Kaela's people, worn and traumatized, breathed in relief as they found seats in the cargo hold. Jaxon, drenched in sweat and tension, guided Kaela to a chair. She sank down, resting her head against his shoulder, eyes drifting closed. "You saved so many," Jaxon whispered. "You saved Holt too." "What?" Her voice was barely audible. "I could not become like him. If I let hatred guide me, my healing would wither. My spirit would darken. He brushed a lock of her dark hair aside. You're kinder than this galaxy deserves. A faint smile curved her lips. Maybe that means there is hope yet. Behind them, one of Andera's men approached, holding a datapad. We got the entire client list. Draven will be pleased, though she lost Andera. Jaxon sighed. We'll see to a proper funeral for Andera. She died fighting for something worthwhile. And then what? The man asked. Jaxon looked at Kaela, at the rescued Serev huddled in the hold, at the other alien captives. We find a safe place for them, somewhere Holt's empire or its remnants can't reach. Or we help them return to their homeworld if it's still theirs. Kaela lifted her gaze. If Serev is free from the raiders, we can rebuild. It may take time, but my people will endure. Will you come with us? She asked hesitantly. Jaxon felt his chest tighten. He had wandered the galaxy for years, aimless, living job to job. Now he had a chance to do something meaningful, to help these people reclaim their future. Yes, he said softly. I will. Moments later, the distant wind and the surviving strike team's vessel lifted off from the decaying sprawl of Duraxis Prime. As they rose into the hazy sky, Jaxon felt an unfamiliar sensation, hope. Perhaps it was fleeting, perhaps not. But for now, they had won a victory. Lives had been saved, and the dark empire of Varen Holt lay in disarray. Kaela stood by the cockpit window, gazing out at the stars that would guide them home. She reached for Jaxon's hand, and he took it. A soft smile passed between them, the promise of better days ahead. In that moment, the universe felt just a little less cold, and a sunrise of possibilities dawned across the distant horizon.